There is a line between sanity and the things that lurk in the silence of the night shift. You're supposed to quit before you cross it. This is what happens when you wait too long. This was my last day as a security guard. I'd been in the business for 15 years, and I thought I'd seen it all. I'd worked derelict amusement parks, foreclosed mansions, even a decommissioned power plant. I was the guy they sent to the problem sites, the ones the younger guards couldn't handle. I was cynical, jaded, and believed that every bump in the night had a rational explanation. Rats, wind, pipes, vagrants. There were no such things as ghosts, just overworked imaginations. My final assignment was supposed to be a cakewalk, the St. Jude's Animal Hospital. It had been shut down a year prior after a funding scandal, and the building was slated for demolition. My job was to keep scrappers and kids out until the bulldozers arrived. The place gave me the creeps from the moment I walked in. The air still held the faint, sickly sweet smell of antiseptic and fear. The silence was punctuated by the rattle of empty steel cages in the kennel and the drip of a leaky faucet in the surgical suite. It was a place of deep, residual sadness. I remember seeing a little scruffy terrier mix sniffing around the dumpster on my first night, and the sight of him, so full of life, felt wrong against the backdrop of so much silent suffering. The first few weeks were uneventful, boring even. I'd do my rounds, check the locks on the drug cabinets, and settle in at the front reception desk with a crossword puzzle. Then the sounds began. It wasn't the building settling, it was something else. It started as a faint scratching noise from the main kennel in the back. I'd go to investigate, flashlight beam dancing across the rows of empty cages, and find nothing. I dismissed it as mice. But the scratching became more insistent, more desperate. Then came the whimpering. It was a low, pathetic sound, the kind a dog makes when it's in terrible pain. It was so faint I thought I was imagining it, that the profound silence of the hospital was making my ears play tricks on me. But the sound was persistent, always seeming to come from the far end of the kennel, from a cage I couldn't quite see clearly from the doorway. It would last for a few minutes, a heartbreaking little cry, and then fade into silence, leaving me with a cold pit in my stomach. My rational mind, my 15 years of experience, was at war with what I was hearing. I meticulously checked every inch of that building. I searched for stray animals that might have gotten trapped inside. I checked the ventilation systems for any way sound could be carrying from outside. I found nothing. The building was sealed tight. Yet every night, the sounds would return. The scratching, the whimpering, and sometimes a low, guttural growl that would make the hair on my arms stand up. I started dreading my rounds at the kennel. The feeling in that room was suffocating. It felt heavy with a collective, unspoken agony. I would stand in the doorway, shining my light down the long concrete corridor, and feel like I was being watched by hundreds of unseen, suffering eyes. I began talking to myself, humming anything to fill the silence and drown out the phantom noises that were slowly eroding my sanity. I stopped sleeping well even at home. The whimpering would echo in my dreams. The night had all ended. A storm was rolling in. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, providing a welcome cover for the usual noises. I almost allowed myself to relax. Around 3 a.m., during a lull in the storm, I heard it. A loud, frantic scratching from the isolation ward at the very back of the hospital, a place I rarely went. It was a sound of pure panic, claws scraping desperately against metal. This was different. It was loud, violent, and undeniable. Against my better judgment, I went to check. The air grew colder as I approached the ISO ward, and the smell of antiseptic was suddenly overwhelmingly strong, mixed with the foul odor of infection and decay. I pushed open the heavy door and shined my flashlight inside. The beam landed on the largest cage at the far end of the room. And there was something inside. For one horrifying, crystal-clear moment, I saw it. It was a dog, or what was left of one. A huge, skeletal creature with matted, patchy fur and open, weeping sores covering its body. Its ribs were starkly visible, and its eyes glowed with a sick yellow light. It was staring right at me, its teeth bared in a silent snarl.
I was frozen, unable to process what I was seeing. The animal was real. I could see the condensation of its breath in the cold air. It threw itself against the cage door, a frantic, silent scrabbling of claws on steel. Then the single light bulb in the hallway flickered violently and went out, plunging me into absolute darkness. The scratching stopped. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of my own heart. I fumbled with my flashlight, my shaking hands barely able to work the switch. When the beam finally cut through the darkness again, the cage was empty. The creature was gone. But the cage door, which I had personally checked and locked not 2 hours earlier, was hanging wide open. Its heavy bolt slid back. That's what broke me. Not the sight of the phantom dog, but the physical, impossible fact of that open door. It meant the creature I saw wasn't just a vision. It was there. And now it was out. I didn't even go back for my coat. I walked out the front door, got into my truck, and drove until the sun came up. I called in the morning and quit, citing personal health reasons. It wasn't a lie. I was diagnosed with severe PTSD and paranoid delusions. My therapist says I created the phantom dog as a manifestation of the building's sad history and my own stress. But I know what I saw. I can still smell the decay and feel the chilling malevolence in that room. That was my last day because I learned that not all things that die stay dead. Some places soaked enough in pain and fear, become scars on the world. And sometimes, if you listen closely in the dark, you can still hear the scratching of something that wants to get out.
This was my last day as a security guard for Citadel Protection Services. I told myself it was just a job, a way to use my military discipline in the quiet of the civilian world. Most nights were the same: silence, solitude, and the slow ticking of the clock. My usual post was the old Blackwood textile mill, a cavernous brick monster on the edge of town. The place was a maze of rusted machinery and shadowy corners, but the threats were predictable. Teenagers looking for a thrill, or homeless folks seeking shelter from the cold. I'd even made a sort of friend, a scruffy, one-eyed tomcat I'd named Patches. I'd bring him scraps of my dinner, and he'd keep me company for a bit, his rumbling purr a small comfort in the oppressive silence. The company's job was simple: keep people out. We were placeholders, human scarecrows for properties caught in legal limbo. I was good at it. I could tell the sound of the wind through a broken pane of glass from the scuff of a sneaker on concrete from 100 yards away. I was comfortable in the dark, or so I thought, before that final shift. That night, something was different. The air was heavy, still, and Patches was nowhere to be found, which was the first red flag. The initial hours passed with their usual sluggish pace. I did my first perimeter check, my flashlight beam cutting a clean cone through the dusty air. Everything was secure. The chains on the main gates were cold and undisturbed. Back in the small security office, a converted foreman's booth with plexiglass windows, I watched the grainy monitors. They showed empty loading bays and silent hallways filled with the skeletal remains of looms. Around 2 a.m., I heard the first sound that didn't belong. It wasn't a rat scurrying or the groan of settling metal. It was a soft, rhythmic scraping noise coming from the main spinning floor, 2 levels below me. It sounded like someone dragging a metal chair across the concrete, slowly, deliberately. I grabbed my maglite, my heart starting a low, heavy drum against my ribs. I've dealt with squatters before. The key is to be firm, loud, and project an authority you don't always feel. I walked the catwalks, my boots echoing in the vast space, and shouted into the darkness, "This is private property. You need to leave now." The scraping stopped. Absolute silence returned, so thick it felt like I was underwater. I swept my light across the entire floor, its beam catching on nothing but dust motes dancing in the air. There was no one there.
I tried to shake it off. Old buildings make noises. It was the wind, a loose piece of sheet metal, anything. I returned to my booth, but the feeling of being watched was now a physical presence, a cold spot on the back of my neck. Then the sounds started again, but they were different this time. From one of the static-filled audio feeds, I heard a whisper. It was faint, like a radio caught between stations, but it was unmistakably a voice, a child's voice, humming a simple, out-of-tune melody. I cranked the volume, my hand trembling slightly. The humming continued for about a minute and then was replaced by a soft giggling. I felt a primal fear, a cold dread that had nothing to do with physical threats. This wasn't a teenager with a beer or a desperate man looking for a place to sleep. This was something fundamentally wrong. I switched between camera feeds, my eyes darting across the screens, searching for the source. Every monitor showed the same empty, decaying factory. Yet the giggling continued, seeming to come from all directions at once, a phantom sound that was inside my head as much as it was in the room. My training kicked in, a fragile shield against the rising panic. Log the incident, call the supervisor. But what would I say? Sir, I think there's a ghost humming on the factory floor? I'd be laughed off the payroll and sent for a psych evaluation. I decided to do one more physical sweep, to prove to myself that I was just tired, that the isolation was finally getting to me. I walked slower this time, my senses on high alert. The air on the main floor was colder than it should have been, carrying a faint, cloying smell like old perfume and decay. As I passed a row of hulking, silent looms, I saw movement in the corner of my eye. I snapped my flashlight in that direction, my heart seizing in my chest. For a split second, I saw it. A small figure, no taller than a child, darting behind one of the machines. It was just a silhouette, a fleeting shape of impossible speed, but it was there. I wasn't questioning my sanity. I was terrified for my life. I didn't run. I couldn't. I was frozen, my light fixed on the spot where the figure had vanished. The humming started again, but it wasn't coming from the audio feed anymore. It was close. It was right behind me. A cold breath ghosted across my ear, and a little girl's voice whispered, as clear as day, a single, terrifying question. Want to play hide and seek? I didn't scream. The sound was trapped in my throat, a strangled gasp. I dropped my flashlight, and it clattered on the concrete, the beam spinning wildly across the floor and the ceiling. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I burst through the front gate, gasping in the cold night air. I got in my car and drove, leaving the company radio screaming unanswered behind me. The next morning, I called my supervisor and told him I quit. I didn't give a reason. I couldn't. How do you explain that the silence of an empty building isn't empty at all? How do you explain a child's laugh that promises nothing but madness? I tried working other jobs after that, but the fear lingered. I was diagnosed with acute anxiety and PTSD. I couldn't be in quiet rooms. Every shadow seemed to hold a small figure, and every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the phantom sensation of cold breath on my neck, and that innocent, monstrous question echoing in my mind. I never saw Patches again, and I'm haunted by the thought of what might have happened to him. That place, that mill, it wasn't just abandoned, it was occupied. It was hungry, and that night, it tried to play a game with me. That was my last day as a security guard, because I learned that some doors are meant to stay closed, and some places are best left to the things that refuse to leave. The real enemy isn't the person trying to break in. It's the thing that's already inside, waiting patiently in the dark.
This was my last day as a security guard. For 2 years, my world had been the silent, sterile expanse of the Orion Tower, a 50-story monument to a tech company that went bankrupt before it ever opened. My job was to make sure its pristine, empty shell remained that way. Unlike the spooky old warehouses some guards got stuck with, the tower was modern, clean, and soulless. Its horror wasn't in the dark, but in the oppressive perfection of its emptiness. Miles of polished marble floors reflected emergency lights into infinity. Motion-activated faucets would hiss to life as I passed restrooms, their brief bursts of water the only sound besides my own footsteps. I had a routine. Patrol floors 1 to 25, take the service elevator to 50, and work my way down. In the dead of night, looking out from the penthouse floor at the sprawling city lights below, I felt like the last person on Earth. Sometimes, I'd see a stray dog trotting through the empty parking lot, a brief, welcome flicker of life in my sterile kingdom. But the loneliness, the sheer scale of the emptiness, it starts to wear on you. You start to see things in the reflections. You start to hear the building breathe. The strangeness started subtly. It began with the elevators. I'd be on the 15th floor, and the main elevator bank would light up, its car ascending silently to the 44th floor, the executive suite, as the plaque read. It would just sit there for 10 or 15 minutes, then descend back to the lobby. The logs showed no activation. No one had a key card but me and the building manager. I told myself it was a system glitch, a ghost in the machine. Then came the phones. On the 32nd floor, an entire open-plan office space, the desk phones would occasionally start to ring. Not just one, but all of them. A deafening, chaotic symphony of digital chirps in the dead silence. The first time it happened, I nearly had a heart attack. I ran to the floor, my light cutting through the dark, and found them all flashing in unison. The moment my boot hit the carpet of the office, they all stopped at once. The sudden silence was somehow more terrifying than the noise had been. I checked the lines. They were all disconnected at the mainframe. It was impossible. The real psychological toll came from the reflections. The Orion Tower was a building made of mirrors, polished granite walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, chrome fixtures. Everywhere I looked, I saw myself. And then I started seeing more than just myself. It would be a fleeting glimpse in the corner of my eye, a tall, slender figure standing behind me in the reflection of a darkened window. When I'd spin around, heart pounding, there was nothing there but the empty, echoing hallways. I started to dread my own reflection. I'd walk with my eyes fixed on the floor, trying to avoid the glass panels that lined every corridor. I felt a constant prickling paranoia, the unshakable feeling of being followed by something that only existed in the periphery, something that lived in the glass. My supervisor, a gruff man named Henderson, told me I was working too many double shifts. "The mind plays tricks in these places, Maria," he'd said. "Get some sleep." But I knew it wasn't lack of sleep. It was the building. It was waking up. My final night began like any other. The city lights twinkled below, a beautiful, distant world I was no longer part of. I was on the 44th floor, the executive suite, a place I particularly hated. It was a labyrinth of glass-walled offices and boardrooms, all furnished with expensive, untouched leather chairs and mahogany desks. As I rounded the corner to the CEO's office, I saw that the lights inside were on. Not the dim emergency lights, but the bright, warm office lights. My blood ran cold. I unholstered my sidearm, my training fighting against a wave of pure terror. I approached the glass door slowly, peering inside. A man was standing there,
He was dressed in a sharp, expensive-looking suit, his back to me, perfectly still, looking out the massive window at the city below. He was tall and unnaturally thin, his posture rigid. I couldn't see his face, only the back of his head and his pale, slender hands clasped behind his back. "Sir," I shouted, my voice cracking, "this is a restricted area. Show me your hands." He didn't move. He didn't even flinch. It was as if he hadn't heard me. I took a deep breath, my hands slick with sweat on the grip of my pistol, and pushed the door open. The air inside was freezing, and it smelled faintly of ozone, like right after a lightning strike. "I'm not going to ask you again," I said, stepping into the room. As I moved, my reflection became visible in the window he was staring out of. I could see myself, gun raised, and I could see him, and then, with an impossibly slow, fluid motion, he turned his head to look at me. But he didn't turn his body. His neck twisted farther than it should, the sound of it a soft, wet crackle. His face came into view and my mind simply broke. It was a perfect, smooth, and utterly blank expanse of skin. There were no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a pale, featureless oval. The part of my brain that was supposed to scream just shut down. There was no sound, no thought, only a white-hot explosion of terror that erased everything. I didn't fire my weapon. I didn't say another word. I just backed out of the room, my legs moving on their own. I didn't even use the main elevator. I ran to the emergency staircase and descended 44 flights of stairs in the dark, my breath sobbing in my chest. I didn't stop running until I was in my car, speeding away from the gleaming, silent tower. I never went back. I left my equipment, my locker, everything. I was later diagnosed with a severe psychotic break, triggered by extreme stress and isolation. They said I was hallucinating. But I know what I saw. I see that smooth, blank face in my nightmares. I can't look in a mirror or a dark window without my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. That was my last day as a security guard because I learned that some empty places are full of the things that were supposed to be there. Pale imitations waiting for an audience. The Orion Tower wasn't empty. It was just waiting for the company to arrive.